What you're looking at is one of the best all-around loudspeakers that I've reviewed here at Zero Fidelity, the Rosso Fiorentino Elba 2. Let's talk about it. Alright, so to kick off this review, I'm going to briefly go over who Rosso Fiorentino is and what they're all about, because I have a funny feeling that most of you watching this video right now have never heard of this company before. So, in a nutshell, Rosso Fiorentino is a high-end loudspeaker manufacturer out of Italy. They've been in business for a little over 10 years, and true to the cliche, they're an Italian company that's all about keeping everything as in-house as possible while offering products that they feel recreate the sensation of a live musical event, particularly when it comes to tone. But what's not so cliche about them is how they get this done, because this is a company that must have started off with a lot of funding. Their main building is this beautiful chateau with an actual concert hall built inside, which they use to routinely host live musical events, whether it's classical, rock and roll, jazz, and they have this exposure to music in a way that few high-end companies do. And having heard just about every single product in their portfolio, I can confirm that they use this experience to inform how they voice their products. So that leads me to the latest entry into their lineup, the Elba 2. Let's take a look at it. Alright, so here it is, a 2.5-way floor standing speaker that's designed to sound good with both a wide variety of component and music types. And when I asked Rosso Fiorentino about this design, they said, hey look, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, all we're trying to do is to take a classic 2.5-way design and to make it sound as good as possible. And that leads me to the different design elements of the Elba 2, starting with the driver configuration. So up top you're going to notice a 1-inch soft dome tweeter, and then beneath that we are going to have two 6.5-inch woofers. It's also important to note that these drivers come from the ScanSpeak Discovery series, and Rosso Fiorentino is one of those companies that would rather take good drivers and then invest the rest of their budget towards the cabinet and the crossover, which of course leads me to the cabinet. So the entire cabinet is going to be made out of HDF to include the bracing. Resonance control within the cabinet is going to be handled with 3 different materials, namely plastic, rubber, and aluminum. Now what you're looking at here is something that's actually pretty cool. So the Rosso Fiorentino Elba 2 uses a paint that has an elastic varnish, and what's so nice about that is when you get micro scratches or fingerprints all over it, because the material is elastic, you can actually very easily rub that out, which is something that I feel people are going to like. What's also pretty cool about the Elba 2 is that on the front of the speaker, you'll notice this synthetic material with this carbon fiber outlay, which is just pretty awesome to look at, especially when the grills are off. Now, the Elba 2, just like every other Rosso Fiorentino product, is customizable. Even though they come standard in the walnut panel that you see here or with a black panel, you can also get them in any color you like, whether it's red, whether it's white, blue, what have you. And if you plan on going the more exotic route, like say ostrich leather or alligator leather, you can get that too, albeit at a price. Anyways, that's going to be the front of the speaker. Now let's look at the back. Alright, so here's the back of the Elba 2, and you're going to notice that elastic varnish covering the speaker from top to bottom. On the back we are also going to have 2 rear firing ports which are tuned to the same frequency, and what you can't see is the fact that the ports are actually made out of aluminum material, which is a much better material than your standard plastic. As we go down, we are going to see a set of speaker terminals. Those are going to be designed and made by Rosso Fiorentino in Florence, Italy. In fact, that's going to be the whole story about the Elba 2, is just about everything short of the drivers and one of the parts on the crossover is actually made in Italy. One of the things that they're very proud of course, is going to be the crossover. So the inductors, resistors, just about everything short of the clarity caps is going to be designed and made in-house. So that's going to be it for our Rosso Fiorentino Elba 2, a set of great looking, well-made speakers. And now it's time to talk about how they actually sound. Okay, so when it comes to performance, I'm going to do something unusual this time around and start off on a personal note. And I'm doing this because it's going to provide you all with some valuable context for what I'm about to say for the rest of this review. So, getting right to it, When I'm building a system for myself, I face two general problems. The first is that I've heard a lot of products and I'm really spoiled, which means I expect a little bit of everything out of my system. I want treble that's really expressive and lively, but I also want it to be smooth and easy to listen to. I want mid-range that has a very good natural tone to it. I want body to the sound, but I don't want it to be too warm, nor do I want it to be too thin. And the same thing applies to the bass. I want bass that's strong, that has some good muscle behind it, but I don't want it to be too thick, nor do I want it to be too slow and or too weak sounding. So I want basically just a little bit of everything, which, as some of you may know, is a very tall order because both of those attributes tend to be at odds with one another. If you want something that's revealing and dynamic and quick, usually you're going to sacrifice a little bit of smoothness and warmth. If you get something that's smooth and warm sounding, usually you're going to sacrifice that dynamic rhythm and that lively nature. So to find a product that has both of those attributes, particularly in a loudspeaker, that's not easy. And then number two, I listen to a wide variety of music. Now I know it's cliche to say, oh, well, I listen to a little bit of everything. And I've come to find that most of the times that's not the case with most people. But with me, it's true. I will go from Doja Cat to Bach within the same listening session, along with a whole other host of different genre types. And to find a system that can handle all of that, have all the attributes I'm listening for, while at the same time sounding good with a very wide variety of music, that's really, really tough. But I think I may have found something that can get the job done in the Elba 2, and that of course leads me to what this speaker is all about. So let's go over the details now. Okay, so when it comes to the performance of the Elba 2, I think most people are going to feel like this is a very balanced sounding speaker. And that's because it has more of this jack-of-all-trades performance envelope to it, in the sense that there's not much that it does wrong. Still, it's going to have a very distinct presentation, so think of it like this. Let's draw a line, and in the center of that line is going to represent tonal neutrality, something that doesn't have a whole lot of coloration to its sound. Over on one end, we're going to have your bright and thin sounding speakers like Focal and Kef, and then on the other end, we're going to have your soft, rolled off and warm sounding speakers like select models from Spender, Harbeth, or Graham. Well, when it comes to the Rosso Fiorentino Elba 2s, what you're going to get is a product that airs slightly towards the warm side of neutral. So this is going to be something that has a warm sound to it. It's going to be slightly laid back and slightly dark sounding. But the interesting thing is, it's not going to come at the expense of liveliness and good dynamic rhythm. In fact, when it comes to how it projects sound out into the room, it's actually going to be more neutral than anything else. It's not forward like, say, a Klipsch or a JBL, but it's not going to be as laid back and as reserved as some other products. And that leads me to the individual elements of the presentation, starting with the treble. So the treble, I think, is expertly done with this speaker. What you have is something that gives you a lot of the traits that audiophiles are looking for, right? Liveliness, good detail, good spatial separation, the ability to take the attack of an instrument and the decay and to make it sound realistic. So when somebody, say, is playing the electric guitar, I mean, there's going to be real bite and grit to the sound. And it's also going to effortlessly capture the little resonant details from, say, somebody hitting a piano key or somebody strumming an acoustic guitar. So this speaker does an exceptional job of giving you all of that information, but it doesn't go over the top with it. It doesn't beat you over the head with an artificial sense of detail, meaning that you also have something that's very easy to listen to on less than perfect recordings. Now, is it going to have the same sharpness as a metal dome will? Well, no, but it's not going to have the same compromises either. So it's overall a very expertly balanced top-end presentation. Now let's move on to the mid-range. So the mid-range is going to have exceptional tone, and again, it's all about balance. It's going to have this warmth and body to the sound, but it's not overly warm, nor is it going to be thin in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it reminds me a lot of your classic BBC sounding mid-range, only without that cabinet coloration. And if anything, it means it's actually a little bit more natural sounding than, say, a Harbeth P3 ESR in terms of mid-range performance. And best of all, because it has a good sense of scale to it, and because there's just a little bit of warmth to the sound, it lends itself well to an incredible variety of music, to even include music that audiophile speakers tend to not sound that great with, like electronic and hip-hop or anything with any kind of synthesizer to it. Moving on to the mid-range, or moving on to the bass, excuse me. So the bass is going to be interesting because what you take away from the bass really depends on your previous reference point. I'll say this. The bass inherently is going to be very strong for a speaker of this size. It's also agile enough to where you can flawlessly track complex bass passages, but How you interpret its heft is going to depend on setup, and it's going to depend again on your previous reference points, because if you're coming from a really big speaker that moves a lot of air, then the bass may come across as just a little bit weak to you. But I think when you look at the design and you look at what you get something that has just a little bit of warmth to the sound, really good punch, and really good fullness for a speaker that's only using two 6.5-inch woofers. Moving on, let's talk about dynamics. This is when laid-back speakers really come into a brick wall because they're not very expressive dynamically. But this speaker, even at low volumes, is pretty darn expressive. In fact, I'm very surprised by how much air this little speaker can move, because whenever there is a crescendo or any kind of dynamic passage, be it in the macro or micro world, I mean, it handles those transitions and that energy very, very well. Now, no, it's not going to be as dynamic as, say, a Klipsch, but it's still very impressive for what it is. And I think a lot of people will be pretty taken back, especially if you're in a medium to small sized room. Imaging, of course, is going to be fantastic, and yet again, we're running into another strength of the Elba 2, which is going to be the layering within the soundstage. So this is a speaker to where when you set it up right, there's going to be layers within the soundstage, which is really cool, especially on like classical recordings, to where you feel like you can actually interpret the tears of musicians within the concert hall. So it's a unique thing that's very difficult to describe unless you hear it, but the Elba does a great job of that. Spatial separation within the soundstage is very good. It's not going to image quite like a really good two-way monitor, but that's to be expected, but it's really, really close. Anyways, guys, I could keep going on and on. Its ability to handle a wide variety of music is also very good. There's just a lot of great things about this speaker, but it's not perfect. So let's go over some of those imperfections now. Okay, so I realized that at this point in the review, I've made the Elba 2 out to sound like it is the best all-around speaker out there in the market, but clearly that's not true. There's going to be some problems with it, so let's go over those problems right now. Starting with the first and most obvious, which is the fact that not everybody is going to like its sound. Of course, this applies to pretty much any hi-fi product, but in the case of the Elba 2, there's going to be people out there who will want a different type of presentation. For example, there's going to be people who want more of a V-curve with sharper, more pronounced treble and stronger bass. Then you're going to have people who want more of that rock concert-like experience that you're going to get out of certain JBLs and Klipsch speakers. And then you have people who love panels, particularly that sense of walk-through transparency that you're going to get with those types of speakers. So this is something that you really do need to audition first before you make a purchasing decision. But that leads me to the next really big problem, which is this. Unless you live inside of Europe or Southeastern Asia, you're going to have a difficult time auditioning these speakers, because as of this moment, there's only one place you can go to in all of North America to audition these, which is going to be in Dallas, Texas, which is where the importer lives. So the good news is that he does offer a 30-day trial period with these speakers, but the bad news is that if you don't like them, return shipping is going to cost you anywhere between $100 to $200. And that leads me to the last caveat, which is the fact that even though these speakers handle a wide variety of music well, they are not drop and plop solutions. Don't just put them in your room haphazardly and expect amazing performance, because when I did that, I ran into very mediocre sound to the point to where I almost didn't review these speakers because I thought they were very average for the money. But once I took the time to set them up and to really get them dialed into my room, that's when things went from 0 to 100 and they were just flat out astounding for the money. So you have to have patience with these speakers in order to get the best that they have to offer. And that, of course, leads me into what you can do to get great sound out of these speakers. Okay, so on the topic of component matching, the first thing that I need to go over with you all is power requirements. So the specs would indicate that this is a very difficult speaker to drive, but in reality, that's not the case at all. The impedance is very benign, meaning that if you're in a small room and you listen to fairly uncomplex music at modest volumes, you can get away with an amplifier that outputs as low as 8 watts per channel. That's going to be fine. However, for most people, I think a good 60 watts per channel is going to be where you want to be to cover most room types and most listening habits. Obviously, if you listen at louder volumes or you like big dynamic swings, you're going to want an amplifier that outputs over 100 watts per channel or more. Now it's time to go over the kind of equipment that it sounds good with. Now, one of the realities that you need to face with the Elba 2 is that it does encroach on true high performance territory, meaning that it sounds best with high quality gear. And in my experience, that means using gear that retails for more than $2,000. In my experience so far, gear under that price point just doesn't do the Elba 2 justice. In fact, the only component that I have on hand that made for or a good match with the Elba 2 under $2,000 is the Muzishare X7, and again, that was only a good match. It didn't really bring out what these speakers have to offer. A good example of a very solid match for just over $2,000 is the Denafrips Hestia and Hyperion combination. Fantastic match, but still the point is you want to use really good gear with the Elba 2s. And now when it comes to voicing, I would say that these speakers sound best with anything that's close to neutral, but it doesn't have to be absolutely neutral, like say a benchmark. It could have a little bit of coloration to the sound, and it could veer in either direction. It could be a little bit warm sounding, or it could be a little bit cool sounding, but you want to stick with something that's fairly close to neutral and something that has some good power to it in terms of quality power supplies. Anyways, that's it for equipment matching. Now let's talk about how to set them up in your room. So the Elba 2 is a speaker that needs some room to breathe. I would say a good 2.5 to 3 feet away from any wall boundary is where they're going to perform their best. In my experience, they sound best with just a little bit of tone. That's when you're going to get that right balance between a good locked in center soundstage, but still get that wide imaging. And then I personally found that they sound best when you elevate them up just a little bit. I actually use the following. Hold on. I use these little 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch cubes, and that elevates the speaker just a little bit to where when I'm in the listening position, it just seems to open up the sound even more. And it's just something to experiment with for yourself, but that's just a little tip that worked for me that I wanted to pass on to you guys. Anyways, that's about it for the Elba 2. Now I'm just going to wrap up this video by giving you all my final thoughts. Okay, look guys, by this point I've covered every objective angle that I could possibly think of for this speaker, so I don't really have anything else to say. So I'm just going to end this on a personal note, which is, in my subjective and biased opinion, the Elba 2 is one of, if not the best, all-around speaker that I've reviewed here at Zero Fidelity. Doesn't mean it's going to be for everyone, but for me, heck, give me a set of these speakers and a pair of really good subwoofers, and this is something that I could actually be happy with for a very, very long time. Anyways, that's going to be my take on the Elba 2. It's a fantastic speaker. Hopefully you brought something away from this review. Stick around if you're into comparisons, but if you're not, and you've made it this far, I don't know how you've tolerated my voice for this long, but I appreciate you just the same. Anyways, guys, all right, until next time, take it easy and peace. Okay, so for those of you who like comparisons, I'm going to go down the line of products that I have that are similar to the Elba 2 in my house and to give you my knee-jerk reaction on how they compare. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the Triangle Astral EZs, which retail for $4,500 a pair. They're very natural competitors, and they're also very different speakers. So the Triangle Astral EZ has a different presentation. It's brighter. It has more of that V-curve sound. The treble is more pronounced. It's sharper. It's a little bit more fatiguing when it comes to less than perfect recordings, but there's going to be people out there who may prefer that liveliness to its tone. Also, you're going to have bass, which is going to be more visceral than what you get out of the Elba 2. The mid-range is going to be thinner. Some people may prefer that, but overall, the Elba 2 is going to have more of a balanced and natural sounding tone to it. There's going to be more depth within the sound stage, and overall, things like the human voice is just going to have a natural timbre to it that you won't quite get out of the Astral EZ. So it's a matter of what you want. Moving on, let's talk about the Klipsch Forte 3. So the Klipsch Forte 3 retails for $4,000, which is just a little bit less than the Elba 2. And what you're going to get out of the Forte 3 is something that'll deliver a bigger sense of scale. It's going to be more dynamic, more power sensitive. It's going to offer just a little bit more of that rock concert, you are there type experience. And while the Elba 2 is no slouch in that regard, it's not going to be able to match the Forte 3 when it comes to that kind of presence. But of course, the Elba 2 is going to be a more balanced sounding speaker. The mid-range is going to be just a little bit more natural in terms of tone. The top end is going to be a little bit easier to listen to, especially on less than perfect recordings. And the bass, while not nearly as strong as what you get on the Forte 3, is going to be just a little bit more agile and a little bit more tonally correct. Now let's talk about the Tecton Design Double Impact. So this is kind of a lopsided comparison because of the price difference. So the Tectons retail for $3,000 shipped, whereas the Elbas are $4,500. And it's an interesting comparison because in a lot of respects, the Tectons are better, right? They offer a fuller range presentation, a bigger sense of scale. The bass is, believe it or not, stronger and quicker than what you get on the Elbas. There's a bigger sense of mid-range, or a bigger sense of scale to the mid-range on the double impacts. The treble is where things begin to fall apart on them in this comparison because the Elba is going to be better in every way. It's more refined, it's even smoother, it's even more detailed, it's just better. The mid-range on the Elba 2, even though it doesn't have that scale, is still going to be more tonally tonally accurate, and because of its tone, I feel like people who listen to hip-hop, to electronic and whatnot, may be more pleased with the Elba 2 than the larger double impact. And then we have the bass. The bass is, of course, not going to be as deep and as tight as what you get on the double impact, but there's still going to be that tone that some people are going to prefer. It's all a matter of what you want. And then lastly, let's talk about the Cornwall. So the Cornwall is basically a bigger, better version of the Forte 3, and that's kind of a criminally short explanation of it, but that's basically it. So you get even a bigger sense of scale. You get even more of that lifelike sound. You get more bass, just more of everything. And that means that the Elba 2 just really can't compete when it comes to that lifelike quality, that more live, you are there, the musical event sensation. The Cornwall does that in a very unique way. But the Elba 2 is still no slouch in that regard. It still has really good presence to the sound. The treble is going to be smoother, more refined. It does strike a better balance between detail and smoothness than the Cornwall does. The mid-range is going to sound just slightly more natural. And here you get a compromise. With the mid-range on the Cornwall, it's going to be much larger in scale, but it's almost cartoonish in terms of how it handles vocals, to where the vocals sound like they have 10-foot lips, whereas on the Elba 2 it sounds more to scale and more natural. So it just depends on what you want. The bass on the Cornwalls is going to be a lot stronger, a lot thicker, but it's not going to be quite as agile as what you get on the Elba 2. So again, it's all a matter of what you want. Anyways, guys, I think I am done speaking about this speaker. So with that said, we've reached the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.